Dear colleagues, good morning. I'm very happy to welcome you to this webinar on high pathogenic avian influenza. Thank you for joining with so many people. High pathogenic avian influenza, no doubt, is one of the most challenging veterinary topics in our time. It has all kinds of aspects in itself to make it such a challenge. The high infectivity and mortality, the epizootic global spread, the possibility of transmission from birds to a variety of species, including mammals, and so on. And of course, mankind learned during the recent COVID pandemic again what may be within the power of a newly mutated virus. There is another aspect which is, amongst others, under veterinary attention. Our strategy so far has not brought sufficient solutions to control the disease. For almost 75 years, the HPAI virus didn't show up, and when it did, most of the transmission was from farm to farm. Some biosecurity measures protected the birds from initial infections by wild fowl. Culling, how unfortunate it is, did the rest of the job. Looking backwards, we can conclude that by then, the need for vaccination was not very prominent. The vaccine was developed, but never used in birds as a preventive strategy. Today, we are looking to an unprecedented outbreak which seems to have other characteristics. Additional measures are needed to prevent HPAI today, given the extent of infection in wild birds, the evidence of increased outbreaks, and the large number of poultry that have been destroyed as a result of this disease. Transmission from waterfowl is more prominent, as is the route from farm to farm to a lesser extent. Also different is earlier we considered HPAI to cause seasonal outbreaks. For now, it seems we have to release that thought. Today, more than it was the case around the millennium turn, reconsideration and re-evaluation of vaccination as a complementary tool is on top of everybody's agenda. The Federation of Veterinarians of Europe, as representative of over 300,000 veterinarians, earlier urged to use vaccination for controlling the disease. Of course, we know all it will immensely help when all partners of the supply chain, including international trade and retail, will share this opinion. Dear colleagues, for me personally, HPAI for always will have a special place in my mind. At the time of the large AI outbreak in 2003 in the Netherlands, I was a poultry practitioner. I vividly can recall we inspected farms confronted with acute morbidity and high mortality to distinguish between AI and other diseases. Part of our job, as done before so many times. Everything changed from the moment one of our colleagues turned out to be infected while inspecting farms. The strain was not supposed to be that contagious for humans. A few days later, our colleague died from a full-blown H7N7 pneumonia. It stressed again the risk of working in the veterinary field. After his passing away, the level of protection was raised. We entered stables in full gear, and when crossing different compartments in the country, we even had to change cars. Are we in a comparable situation today? What kinds of tools are available to control the disease effectively? Reason enough for FVE, together with PVSG, the Poultry Veterinary Study Group of the EU, to organize this webinar. Avian influenza brings together all aspects anchored deep in the DNA of veterinarians, supporting animal health, animal welfare, public health, as well as the environment. Today, we bring together some colleagues being experts on avian influenza. Let's learn from them and let's discuss with them. Wishing you a fruitful webinar. Thank you. And then by now, it's an honor for me to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Tim Harder. Tim graduated as a veterinarian from the Hanover Veterinary School in 1989. He is currently affiliated with the Friedrich Loeffler Institute in Germany, where he serves as the head of the National Reference Laboratory for Avian Influenza. The laboratory is a member of international networks, such as the WOA, the former OAI, and FAO for Animal Influenza Research and Diagnosis. Tim's research focuses on developing better diagnostic tools, molecular epidemiology, and the pathogenesis of influenza virus infections in animals, with a particular emphasis on avian hosts, such as wild birds and poultry. The title of Tim's presentation is HPAI, Field Situation, Surveillance, and Control Methods. And I want to remind to you, dear colleagues in the audience, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me in this session. Dear colleagues, a very good morning from a sunny island of Reims today. I hope everybody can see the presentation mode of that PPT. And I would like to start to give you a little bit of a historic background of the HPAI pan-zoonotic that we are actually experiencing at this moment. We are talking about the descendant viruses of a great-grandfather virus that first surfaced in the south of China in the mid-1990s. In a goose flock, actually, and this virus was of the subtype H5N1. It was highly pathogenic, and because of its origin in geese in the Chinese province of Guangdong, this lineage is now referred to as the GSGD lineage. And the viruses we are talking about today are a direct descendants of this more or less in virological terms, at least, ancient virus. So what did we see since the mid-1990s? Our focus actually was in the beginning, it was in the southeast of Asia. And from there, we saw escapes of this virus to Western Asia and into Europe. And actually, it seemed that we had several waves of this out of Asia phenomenon of high-path avian influenza viruses. The majority of them actually being vectored by infected wild birds on their migration routes into Asia and out of Asia down several different flyways. And Europe was not the only destination of these viruses. They made it in several waves also into the Middle and Near East, into Northern Africa, and finally have reached Western Africa and the southern tip of the continent. In 2021, we experienced the transition of other lineages and variants of that goose Guangdong viruses towards the North American continent, where it spread rapidly over the year. And in 2022, also made it across Mesoamerica into Southern America, where it is actually being spread along the Pacific coast, but also has made it onto the Atlantic coast of South America in Uruguay and Argentina, for example. The dots that are seen here on this map, which is regularly updated by the FAO, seems to indicate where the hotspots of the infections actually are. However, we must keep in mind that surveillance intensity and reporting fidelity is not homogeneous around the globe. And there are several countries which were affected early on by an zoonotic infection with these viruses, such as Indonesia, or Egypt, for example, have an exemption to notify each and every single case because they are considered to be enzootically infected. So you won't find any dots on this map for these countries, although for certain there will be virus replication also. Coming back to my country, Germany, you see that we also experienced since 2006 frequent incursions of this goose guandong virus lineage with different subtypes, and because the heme agglutinin of these viruses continuously evolved and also does it today, so that different phylogenetic clades had to be defined. You see this succession of clades, each being founded in separate introduction incursions of this virus, mostly through infected migratory wild birds. And you see the intensity of outbreaks and the number of cases detected has increased over the years with the unprecedented intensity since 2021, with viruses of the goose guandong lineage with subtype H5N1 and clade designation 2344B. We see in Germany particularly widespread infection of wild birds, and numerous species were infected. I don't think this is giving the full screen of all affected species, but some of them, like these birds of prey, usually make up single cases, but we also have mass mortalities like on this lake in Israel, for example, as well as with different waterfowl, wild waterfowl species across Europe. The most recent developments and moves of the virus seem to involve gull species in particular. So we conclude that some of the genotypes, the different genotypes of that lineage, have been generated through reassortment in gulls and probably with the help of gull-adapted viruses. So this subtype H13 is specific or specialized to infect gulls, and the most recent genotypes, especially in the southwest of Europe, contain genome segments of these gull viruses. And the outbreaks and the cases that we register these days in Europe are actually dominated by infected gulls and gull carcasses, black-headed gulls, and different pelagic gull species are affected as well. As you see, and you know, many of these gull species are in Throphilis, so they follow the human population, and therefore may act as bridging species, bridging the habitats of migratory waterfowl and poultry holdings, as indicated here in these pictures. And you know, the large gull species, the skuas, They have been infected in 2020 and 2021 in some of the North Atlantic and British islands, and they are suspected to have contributed to the spread of the GSGD lineage across the Atlantic into North America. So it seems these viruses, and in particular the GSGD lineage, is very successful from a virological point of view, at least. And this is due to some generic features of all influenza A viruses. They are masters of variation, and they do so because they have a segmented RNA genome. So there are 8 genome segments that make up a single virus. And when 2 of these viruses infect the same host cell, they may exchange these genome segments and generate new so-called reassortants, new genotypes. And these viruses may have new phenotypic features that enable them to better replication in avian hosts or to jump into other host species. It's very hard to predict the moves these viruses do when reassorting. And there is a second mechanism that is also based on the RNA genome of these viruses. They come with their own set of a copy machine for their genomes. But this copy machine works rather sloppy. So it generates a lot of point mutations. And this is generating a so-called genetic drift. If you imagine that 10,000 viruses are produced by one infected host cell, not one of these 10,000 progeny viruses are completely identical to the parental virus. They carry 1 to 2 to 3 mutations in their genome, so they rather make up a cloud of genetically closely related organisms. And that, as you will see, is a big advantage in the battle for selective advantages. So when we talk of high-path avian influenza H5N1, H5N1 today is not the same H5N1 as we experienced in 1996 or 2005. These are different viruses. They harbor different segments, so they are constituted of different genotypes, and also the hemagglutinin, the H component, the H5, has continued to evolve. And even within these clades, 2344B viruses are not necessarily the same like another 2344B viruses. They just are a member of this large group. These are some European viruses detected since 2021 and analyzed by my colleague Anne Pohlmann and Jacqueline King at FLI. And you see this big wheel of variation that we see both in genotype and in the makeup of the hemagglutinin gene. And here you see the development of the different genotypes. Each color stands for a different and unique genotypes of all the H5 viruses that we have seen in Germany since 2021. You can see that we have, especially here during the autumn of 2021 and the spring of 22, we had an inflation in the abundance of different genotypes, with up to 12 different genotypes circulating simultaneously in wild birds in Germany. But then we had a kind of deflation, and selection took over. And it seems that this dark blue genotype had some advantages in fitness. Maybe it's replicating more efficiently, especially in the avian host and in wild birds, and dominates, at least in Germany, the current pan-zoonotic. This may be different in other countries, even within Europe, where other genotypes prevail. So I already mentioned the sloppiness of the replication of these influenza viruses, and it is very easy to follow the replication. If we just concentrate on the viruses, there's some input of viruses, there is some replication going on in the bird, and it produces some output of viruses. But as said before, these viruses are not uniformly identical. They differ quite a lot, and we are especially interested to detect and follow up any of those variants that have increased zoonotic potential. Currently, in the current panzootic, we see something that has not been documented or seen or detected in spread of these viruses before, namely a number of sporadic infections of terrestrial mammals, wild carnivores, as well as marine mammals, which become infected by ingesting infected wild birds. Many of those mammals have been found dead, and these cases dominated with an encephalitis. And in the few cases found alive, neurological signs were prevailing. So the virus has some neurotropic tendency, at least in those several hundred cases documented so far worldwide. It would be very interesting to know whether more carnivores have been infected and how they dealt with the infection, whether we are just seeing the tip of an iceberg of cases that had a fatal outcome, and then the majority of those wild carnivorous populations have been infected asymptomatically. We see, however, dramatically at the moment here at the Pacific coast of South America, of Peru and of Chile, several thousand cases of infected sea lions, which die from the HPAI H5N1 infection. And here, in this case, seal-to-seal infection is suspected. So we fear that the increased number of mammalian cases seen currently may act as an accelerator of mammalian adaptation of these HPAI viruses, and some of well-known mutation which indicate mammalian adaptation actually are enriched in these animals. So there may be actually a new interface of the virus to human through infected carnivorous wildlife. However, this is a very busy slide, and we do not go into details. The important thing is here this stepwise increase of adaptation mutations that the virus actually requires from a purely avian virus to a purely and then pandemic human virus. So there are many steps this virus has to overcome to be a real human adapted virus. However, we know that some of the reassortment steps may accelerate this way up the stairway to the human host. And we have to still take a close look at those actions. So I just found that on the internet these days of the Palomino islands in the Pacific of Lima, Peru, you can swim as a tourist with the sea lions. So that may be quite fun in peace times, but nowadays I think this is high risk behavior and another human wildlife interface that you would not think of in the first instance. So there are several tools the international organization holds in place for us to assess the risk of high-path avian influenza viruses for humans, and the current assessment puts these viruses into a medium risk range. So there are other viruses which have higher zoonotic potential. So our viruses are still in the medium range. And this is also reflected in the low number of cases, of human cases, that actually have been reported. This great guy, David Attenborough, he has not been infected, but he was taken care of to avoid exposure. And the few cases, and the last one comes here from Chile, reflect that the zoonotic risks remain low at the moment. So can high-path avian influenza still be controlled? We have the tragedy in the wild bird population, which is more or less, I would say, out of control. But as Renz has just put in his introduction, the stamping out mechanism still prevails, and this is what has proven, at least in Europe, to have worked to contain the virus. However, it is very demanding, and early detection, of course, is key to everything. Vaccination is a second layer of protection. If this detect, confirm, cull, and compensate mechanism fails, and vaccination is not able to be used for eradication of the virus when used as the only strategy. So safe rearing, safe products, confident customers, this is something we have to keep in mind, and surveillance will play a key role in maintaining safe products and safe rearing. We have passive surveillance in place in poultry that works well with chicken and turkeys, not so well with waterfowl, which is more resistant, and the lag phase until extended mortality is detected can be prolonged. However, if we start vaccinating our chicken and turkey population, we will turn them, at least functionally, into ducks for which the same applies. They are more resistant, and a lag phase would be extended. So we have to keep this in mind, this kind of Trojan duck principle. Our goals of surveillance remain early monitoring, but how do we select the random sample size? The performance of the surveillance, especially in vaccinated flock, has been defined by this new EU delegated act, and we see this kind of mortality curve in, for example, a turkey flock. This would be our mortality threshold, and we need to increase the sensitivity of monitoring, for example, by bucket sampling, weekly testing of swab sampling from dead birds. And we also need to think more hard about a smart reduction of this random sample size. Can we use environmental samples to screen those flocks, especially the vaccinated ones? So vaccination is a big wheel that we need to turn to ensure that free trade with products from vaccinated flocks will still be possible in Europe. Surveillance plays the major part, and do not think, please, that if you start vaccination, you'll have a safety blanket and everything is fine. Not the way. It will be the surveillance that plays the main part and tell you what is going on in your flock. We need to ensure that no high-path avian influenza is hiding in vaccinated flock. The Delegated Act tries to ensure this, and we need to prove that the flock is optimally vaccinated to ensure that the spreading factor is below 0. Then no HPAI spread is possible within this flock, and unimpeded trade should be possible. So the conclusions is that the current panzootic spread of the goose Guangdong lineage is unprecedented. We see, however, an increase of still sporadic, mainly sporadic infection of wild mammals, and that may foster adaptation of the virus to mammals and to humans, maybe. Stamping out is still our core strategy to control the virus, and vaccination as a second layer on top of that should not be used as an excuse to tolerate coexistence with HPAI in the European Union. And with that, I'm at the end of my talk, and thank you very much for your interest and attention. Thank you.
And thank you, Tim, for a really an excellent and excellent presentation with a lot of information for us to digest, which we will do. I'm sure later on there will be more questions. For the moment, we have to go to the next speaker. Again, a lot of thanks for your presentation, Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
So with that, I'd like to go ahead and welcome with enormous pleasure our next speaker, who is Francesca Baldinelli. Francesca graduated as a veterinarian in 2005 from the University degli Studi di Perugia in Italy. She completed a PhD epidemiology and zoonosis control and a postgraduate diploma in veterinary public health. She then went on to work as an epidemiologist for several years before becoming a scientific officer at the European Food Safety Authority, EFSA. In 2015, and she still was working there. Francesca, thank you for being with us today, and I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen very well.
Okay. Good. Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So, really happy to be here to present the work we are doing as EFSA. EFSA is the European Food Safety Authority located in Parma in EFSA, and is responsible to issue scientific opinion on requests from the Commission, the Parliament, and the Member States. And this opinion form the basis for new legislative acts at union level. So I'm here to introduce you to a mandate we have received from the Commission about vaccination against HPAI in poultry. Let me give you really few background on that, because vaccination before the implementation of the animal health law was prohibited. In any case, member states could apply vaccination programs following the approval by the Commission for emergency or preventive vaccination. However, in the last epidemiological years, Europe faces the worst HPAI epidemic ever, as Tim already presented to all of us. So, unprecedented in relation to the number of outbreaks reported in wild birds, in poultry, the number of wild bird species affected, the geographical extent of those cases, but also the seasonality and presence of the virus all along the year. So this was a real issue for the poultry industry, which had to face serious challenges to prevent the introduction and to prevent further spread within establishments. Consequently, member states are looking for solutions to increase their ability to prevent and control HPAI, using vaccination as an additional tool to the ones that are already provided in the legislation, so for prevention and control. The European Commission has very recently released a delegated regulation complementing the animal health law, the AHL, which is providing information detailed and specific for the use in the Union of veterinary medicinal products with regard to the prevention and control of certain diseases, including HPAI. So this delegated regulation allows for vaccination against HPAI without approval of the plan by the Commission in domestic birds in the Union, and also gives the rules for the surveillance after vaccination. This allows the member states to start the vaccination in their countries if needed, but the rules are generic and do not reflect specifically to HPAI, because this is applicable also to other diseases, the so-called category A diseases in the animal health law. So meanwhile, the Commission asked EFSA to answer the 4 questions you can see here. EFSA received this mandate in July last year and have been requested to give an update on the available vaccines against HPAI in poultry, to assess possible vaccination strategies, to assess possible surveillance strategies in the vaccinated zones and establishment, and to assess restriction and risk mitigation measures to be applied following vaccination. The deadline for those 4 questions is different. For the first 2, we will be producing a scientific opinion in summer this year, whereas for the other 2, the deadline is March next year. So let me give you some more information about what exactly the Commission would like to know and what we are working on. So the work is ongoing. I cannot present you preliminary results, but I can give you an idea on what will be produced by EFSA. The first TOR, as said, is asking to identify and to describe vaccines that might be available for vaccination of poultry. I want to tell you that for this specific TOR, we have been requested to work in close collaboration with the Union Reference Laboratory for Avian Influenza and Newcastle disease, which is the IZS of Venezia in Italy, but also with the European Medicine Agency, EMA, and we are doing so. So for this one, we should describe the suitability of those identified vaccine to be applied in the different poultry species, their capacity to protect against the currently circulated strains, but also to be adjusted in the future to any other possible HPAI viruses, and to protect against also multiple strains and to be used in a context of a DIVA vaccination strategies. The Commission would like to know the effectiveness in preventing the infection of those vaccines, mean as preventing the spread, to stop the spread, and then any potential drawbacks following the application of vaccination and the use of certain type of vaccines, such as the shedding of the live attenuated strains, viruses that can be due as a consequence of different, let's say, hazard. For the second TOR, EFSA has been requested to give a detailed assessment of different possible vaccination scenarios. We should start describing and taking into consideration the 3 vaccination strategies which are already described in the delegated regulation, which are vaccination for emergency suppressive reasons, for emergency protective reasons, but also for preventive reasons. And we should describe the efficacy of those vaccination strategies or scenarios in relation to the achievement of the different objectives, such as maintenance of freedom, minimizing the loss, a swift rapid eradication, and also in relation to those risk factors that will trigger the application of the vaccination scheme. So just to give you some example, as risk factors, we are considering the risk areas, but also the high risk poultry production, the density, the highly density area of poultry establishment. And we will take into consideration different components of a vaccination scenario. The first step is, of course, to identify vaccination scenario and then to assess and test their efficacy in stopping the spread of the infection. We will also consider which is the minimum coverage, the minimum size, and of course the type of vaccine that should be used. We will consider, as I told you, the 3 vaccination strategies described in the delegated regulation, but we also assess alternatives, so other vaccination scenarios and strategies. For the third TOR, we will have the same approach. So we aim to identify surveillance scenarios and then to assess their efficacy in early detecting the virus if present, and after natural infection, and to prevent the spread of the virus by movement of flock, so allowing for a safe movement of animals. We will start also here from what is already described in the delegated regulation, and we will also provide for alternatives to be tested for their efficacy to detect the virus, to authorize the movement of the animals, but also to see what should be done after the cessation of the vaccination. We will consider for surveillance also what is currently under the war regulation, and explore and provide for alternatives, if available, if effective, to demonstrate the freedom from the disease. In the latest TOR, we will have a very similar approach, because we will give an assessment of what are the risk mitigation measures that can be applied after vaccination to enable safe movement of poultry and their product. And we will explore not only what is already currently in the delegated regulation, but we will also provide for alternatives. As I told you, the work is ongoing, and thank you for your attention and the possibility to report you what EFSA is working on now. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesca, for a very, very clear overview. And like Tim, I can see you're very experienced speakers, respecting all times, etc., etc. Thanks a lot for this information. I think there's one important question coming in to Francesca, which I will read on. It's from Olivier or Oliver. Francesca, why consider the risk of shedding of live attenuated strains when the Delegated Act bans the use of live modified vaccines for AI? I think that's a logic question.
Yes, we will not consider live virus in our mandate. So we will concentrate on available vaccines that are not using live virus. So this is one point. Thanks.
Okay, thanks for answering this question. Then we'll go to our third speaker of this morning, and now we will turn to practice. I want to introduce to you Lenny Corin. He's a poultry veterinarian and resident of the European College of Poultry Veterinary Sciences, and also a member of PVSG. He graduated from Toulouse Veterinary University in France in 2008. He's very active in different poultry production schemes, from parental flocks to commercial flocks, including strong experience in free-ranging birds and duck farming. Thus has many years of experience with HPAI. Please, Lenny, share with our colleagues your views and thoughts regarding daily practice. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. I will attempt to share my screen right now. Can I assume that you see my screen? Can you all see my screen and hear me properly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. I am indeed a field veterinarian in Southwest France, so very much, unfortunately, very much experienced with avian influenza. However, I'm going to talk to you today as a spokesperson of a vaccination working group of the poultry industry that was formed a few months ago, and I will give you a few details later. So to give you a bit of background, France, like many other European countries, has been hit for several years now with avian influenza. On the left of your screen, you've got the situation for last winter, so 21-22 winter, and the purple dots are actually the cases of commercial flocks infected. We had nearly 1,400 commercial flocks infected last winter, for a total cost estimated roughly at around 1.4 billion euros. To make it very simple about the French characteristic feature of the poultry farming and industry in France, there is a significant production of ducks. And as we all know, ducks have a high sensibility to HPAI, and they play a great role in introduction, but also maintenance of avian influenza within a territory. So on the right side of your screen, you've got a map of France, for which in yellow, this is a predictive model based on statistical analysis. That's a prediction map of spreading avian influenza in France, and the yellow zones are actually what we call the spreading, the diffusion risk zone. It's a predictive model, and to make it very short and very simple, the yellow zone are the zones in which you have high density of duck farms. And actually, if you compare the two maps, you can see greatly that the left map, the purple points, overlap greatly with the predictive zone. This is the calendar that the Ministry of Agriculture communicated to professionals. That's the latest calendar by the end of last February, to give their schedule, the French schedule on vaccine implementation. So very quickly, last December, the authorities communicated to professionals the results of different experiments they ran last summer on ducks to experiment vaccine candidates on ducks. We expected actually by the end of March a scientific expertise, a position paper from the Food Safety Agency, so the ANSES, to give to the authorities their position, their scientific position with different scenarios to advise the French authorities. And actually, I can't tell you much more about this scenario because they are giving this morning precisely to the authorities their position and their opinion. So I'm not able to give you some more information today. However, as soon as we'll have this position, it is planned that this scenario will be assessed from an economic but also labor and feasibility point of view in collaboration with the poultry industry. The goal, according to this schedule, is to validate one scenario of vaccination around May of this year, and ideally to start a vaccination plan by September, or let's say by October. So actually, that's the calendar as given by the authorities. So that's why since October last year, so October 2022, the industry, the poultry industry, created a group of field veterinary actors of poultry sectors to have a practical field approach of what could be a possible vaccination implementation in France. So one more time, I hereby speak to you as a spokesperson of this group. This group was composed of the major poultry organization in France, but also the main veterinary practices and 2 pharmaceutical companies with vaccine candidates. The goal of this poultry industry vaccination group was to consider the feasibility of possible scenario that we imagined. One more time, I want to clarify, this is not a scientific approach, this is not a scientific recommendation by the industry, it's more a feasibility approach of a possible implementation. Is it possible to implement this vaccination in terms of labor, but also a cost? The approach of this group was then to share this reflection to have whoever could listen to it, including the scientific authorities in France or decision makers in Europe. So to do this work, we questioned different pharmaceutical companies with vaccine candidates, and actually we included in our work 4 vaccine candidates that are in the pipeline of being registered in Europe. 2 vaccines come from the Boehringer Ingelheim company. One of them, called the Volvac Best, is a subunit inactivated vaccine. The other one in the pipeline is an HVT H5 vector vaccine. As for Siva pharmaceutical company, we considered 2 vaccines as well, one being an H5 vector vaccine and the other one being an RNA messenger vaccine. And as you can see, amongst these 4 candidates in the pipeline to be registered in Europe, 2 of them are suitable for ducks that are the Volvac-based, but also the RNA response vaccine from Siva. So we then went through the European Delegated Act to give us some strict rules in terms of monitoring, of surveillance, of possible vaccinated flocks. We tried to stick to the rule as much as possible, and that includes weekly monitoring PCR on dead birds, but also monthly veterinary visits by official veterinarians, alongside PCR tests on live birds. And on top of that, we decided to add some serology toward the end of the flock in order to monitor the vaccine intake, but also to be able to rule out a possible field challenge that could have been underdiagnosed during the life cycle. So all this work gave us the number of visits and tests per type of production. So if you take this table down the last line, for example, for broilers, it gives us that a normal flock of broiler in France should run 5 PCR tests if it's vaccinated, plus 1 veterinary visit, plus 1 serological test. So we went through all this number of tests that we expect per type of flock, per type of production. And then we imagined 4 scenarios of preventative vaccination only, for which we tried to estimate the labor and the cost associated to this. So the first scenario, I'm going to go quickly on that, but basically the first scenario was to protect only the very highly susceptible species, only in wintertime and only on the yellow zones in France, which are the core of the risk of spread. So basically our first scenario was to vaccinate only ducks and turkeys in, roughly speaking, from November till the end of April, only in the west part of France in the high risk zones. And as you can see, our table calculated how many doses of vaccine we'll need. So in that case, roughly 50 million doses. Half of it will be applied at the hatchery. And we've got the workforce needed in terms of people to inject these doses to birds, but also the workforce for veterinary visits if you stick to the European Delegated Act number of veterinary visits needed. So we roughly estimated the cost of this first scenario that should be around 35 million euros. One more time, that's an approximation. The second scenario we went through was to do the same, but to add to these species the layers that have long cycles and also the capons that are also birds with long cycles. But we decided to go through this scenario to vaccinate those birds all across the country throughout the year. So as you can see, the number of doses increased, the cost increased, the workforce and the labor increased, and the monitoring price, of course, increased, including a dramatic numbers of veterinary visits needed. We imagined a third scenario that was to reach a threshold of 60%. This is based on different publication that I'm not going to go through, but this scenario number 3 was to reach a threshold of 60% of vaccinated flocks within the risk zones, so the yellow zones of our map. So basically, this scenario includes the same species plus the broilers above 42 days of age, and we've got quite a few in France actually, throughout the year. So one more time, you see the number of doses required that have increased, the workforce increasing, and the monitoring price increase. And for the first time on this third scenario, the monitoring cost is roughly the same cost as the vaccination itself. And eventually, we also add to imagine a last final scenario that will basically include all poultry all year long, all across the country, except wild games and except breeders. And I want to have a word to say that none of our scenario imagine a possible vaccination on breeders, neither on selection or GPs, in order to, first of all, avoid possible interference with maternally derived antibodies interference on the offspring that could be also vaccinated, but also to limit the great commercial concerns that we'll have if we had to vaccinate breeders or GPs, so commercial concerns. So that's the reason why we always ruled out possible vaccination on breeders. And as you can see, the cost, the final cost of this biggest scenario goes around 325 million euros. And as a comparison, last year crisis costed 1.4 billion euros. So slight different challenge. So these tables synthesize the different scenarios that I already talked to you about with different costs and benefits and risk. These are the tables that allowed us to calculate. So we had an approximation of number of birds per flock in each part of the country. The spreadsheet here down below calculates the cost based on the price of each visit or lab test and so on. And eventually, we managed to calculate the impact of such a vaccination on poultry meat, but also on the egg price in order to anticipate the commercial impact of such a vaccination. So one more time, this is a gross approach by the industry. These are not scientific recommendations. There will be plenty of modification that will pop up. But as a conclusion, I'm quite happy to say that this industry work was presented to authorities by some of my colleagues, and it was fairly well welcomed by the authorities. So now it gives us a new basic work for exchange and collaboration between the industry and the administration. According to the calendar that I presented to you earlier, we expect actually today different scientific scenario by the Food Safety Agency to give to the authorities. And very quickly, our group of industry working group should go through this scenario to assess the feasibility and the cost. We expect some vaccine orders to be placed soon by the French authorities. And I must tell you that at the same time, the poultry industry and mostly the duck industry works hard also to possibly reduce the winter flock placement for next winter. And just to tell you a bit more, this was already done and implemented the just past winter in some part of France. So I can't tell you what's going to happen in France in terms of vaccination next year. It's likely to be at least a scenario with vaccination of some ducks alongside a reduction placement. I can't tell you much more for the moment. Thank you very much for your time.
And thank you very much. Thank you, Lenny, for your excellent presentation. And thank you for drafting these 4 scenarios. It sorts out a lot of information, which is quite complex, but here we can oversee it very clear. I'm sure your slides, which you have agreed on to share with the audience, will be studied very well. And I want to thank you on behalf of the audience for your excellent presentation. Dear colleagues, for now it's time to continue with our panel discussion. And I'd like to hand over to Thierry Chambon, who is Vice President of FVE. Thierry also has been a poultry practitioner for many, many years in France, and he will moderate our panel. Thierry, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rens. Thank you. We appreciate you being here, of course. Thank you for this presentation. So our purpose now is to share views and create a large group discussion where everyone in the audience is encouraged to get involved with questions, comments, and ideas. So maybe, Wiebke, could you explain our next app, WooClap, to give the opportunity to the audience to give his opinion on these topics?
Yes, good morning as well from the FVE office. We would like to hear from you now, and therefore we created a WooClap. So you can either scan the QR code, you can either go to the website and enter the event code. You can enter this as an SMS, or you can simply click on the participation link that is in the chat now. And I see that there are already people logging in, so this is great.
So, can we start for the
Yes.
first question.
And here's now the first question.
So the first question is, do you believe we should start HPAI vaccination, even though there are still shortcomings? So there's a scale from 1 is not very much to 10, very much. So we are waiting for your input. So please. I don't know, Vika, if you have enough answers.
Well, we have now 65. There are almost 100 people that are logged in. So maybe we'll wait another few seconds and then we will close this one. I think the results are pretty clear. I think we can stop here. So I will close this now. Thank you very much for everyone who voted. We will now continue with the second question.
So you can see on the screen, not yet, yes. For the second question, which is, in your opinion, what are the most important measures to mitigate the HPAI burden in Europe?
Yes, and please one word, so it will turn out into a word cloud. That is really brilliant.
So
yeah, I think we're good to go. Yes, so we'll close this now. Hold on. It's not moving anymore. Yes, thank you. Very good.
So thank you. So thank you for the results. So maybe we can skip to our panel discussion. And may I introduce you to the floor. So we have 4 panelists today. First, Birte Steenberg from AVEC. Birte graduated as a veterinarian from the University of Copenhagen in 1992 and is currently the Secretary General of AVEC EU Poultry. AVEC serves as the representative body of the European poultry meat industry, aiming to foster communication and dialogue between international organizations and decision makers. The organization places particular emphasis on animal welfare and health, as well as food safety and quality, trade and sustainable development. We have a second panelist, David John from Animal Health Europe. David graduated in agricultural chemistry from Leeds University in 1988. He moved to Brussels in 2011 to join the technical group at Animals Health Europe, and he is currently Senior Technical Manager responsible for research and development topics, including immunologicals and biologicals. Prior to joining Animal Health Europe, he spent many years working for Covance, initially responsible for conducting livestock metabolism and residue studies before moving to ecotoxicology to conduct both aquatic and terrestrial studies. We have also Jane Clark from the European Association of State Veterinary Officers, which is a section of FVE. Jane is currently the Food Standard Agency's Director of Veterinary Services. She has had an interesting and varied veterinary career, working in international clinical settings and then as a temporary veterinary inspector for the State Veterinary Service during the 2001 foot and mouth disease outbreak. She held roles in the operations, policy, veterinary science directorate of DEFRA and the Animal and Plant Health Agency. This has included working as the UK's head of EU relations for animal health and welfare, the agency veterinary lead for avian biology in the UK's National Reference Laboratory, and most recently, one of the agency's veterinary leads in Wales. We have also Estelle Amler from the World Organization for Animal Health, WOHA, former OIE. Estelle joined WOHA in 2022 and is the sub-regional representative in Brussels. Her role is to promote WOHA values and mandate, facilitating the active participation of members in WOHA activities and strengthening collaboration with relevant public and private partners so as to ensure that regional needs around are well addressed. The main activities of WOHA in the region are organized around three main topics: animal health, animal welfare, and One Health. She's a veterinarian and was previously working as a veterinarian inspector for the French administration, with the main topics being emergency management and international trade. So thank you. We have the first question. So what we asked to the public was, are you in favor of HPAI vaccination, even though there are still some shortcomings? So maybe, David, could you first give your comments to this question? Thank you.
Yeah, and it's always a complex question. I think Tim Harder said it in his presentation. Vaccination should not be considered as the sole means of control, but it is one of the tools you can implement in the control of HPAI as part of a package of measures, including biosecurity and surveillance. And those decisions on control measures, must take into account the epidemiological situation and the particular circumstances of a country or area. Where there is a risk of disease spread or the disease control measures impact food security, vaccination may form part of an official control program put in place by the national authorities, obviously based on the specific rules in the EU legislation and in consultation with the stakeholders. And we've seen a lot about that process in France from Lenny in his presentation. But I think where you do use vaccination, it's important to have a robust surveillance program in place and to maintain high biosecurity. And it should not affect the HPAI status of a free country or zone, in accordance with the WOA standards, if sufficient and relevant surveillance supports the absence of the field virus. So I think it's very much a decision for the national authorities based on their circumstances.
Thank you, David. Maybe some comments from the other panelists? No. If it's not the case, we can move to the other questions. So,
Thierry, I think we've all discussed this is a very complex situation. And I was very interested to see one of the questions to Lenny was, will the veterinary capacity be able to support this? And I think that all of those complex discussions, as David said, need to be taken into account working with the industry, working with the veterinary profession, working across international boundaries. And I'm sure we'll explore that a little bit more as we go through.
Thank you, Jane. Other comments? No, so I will go to the second questions. In your opinion, what are the most important measures to mitigate the HPAI burden in Europe? So maybe, Birte, first, if you can give an answer. Thank you. You are muted. No?
No? No? Yes? Fantastic. I don't know what's happening here. Now, so many years with this, and I still can't find out. Maybe I should consider retiring. No, anyway. Thank you so much for inviting me to this really, really important meeting. And actually, this meeting represents what I would say is the most important in trying to get rid of this huge problem: collaboration. Really, collaboration. That was the word I put into the cloud. Biosecurity was the most prominent word. Of course, biosecurity is of huge importance, but we have to admit that it has not really worked as well as we would love it to do. I mean, we have with biosecurity tried for many years. And of course, we should not let that go. We should keep on with biosecurity as much as possible. But we also now need to look at vaccination. I loved, of course, what David said. It's not the sole tool that's going to solve all the problems, but collaboration within a country. And there I really love to hear what Lenny said about the collaboration between the academics, the practitioners and the authorities. But we also need to do that on the European level. So fantastic that we have EFSA here in this panel, but then also EFSA and WOA needs to be in very close contact, and I know they are, and the authorities of the different countries, because representing the European poultry meat trade and also the European poultry breeders, the international trade with our products produced in Europe is of huge importance. So we need to create a lot of trust within our trading partners, and their collaboration, transparency, and knowledge sharing is so important all the way. So also, when we have one country where there's a huge pressure, one country in Europe where there's a huge pressure to start vaccination because there are huge difficulties in that country, they also need to see what's happening in the countries around them, because it doesn't really respect borders, this bug, does it? So collaboration, I would say, really, really important.
Thank you very much for these comments. Maybe from the panelists, do you have any more comments about this question? No. If it's not the case,
Sorry.
Yes, David.
Oh, sorry, Thierry, I was a bit slow. Yeah, and I think I'd agree with Berta. You know, it's collaboration. You know, as with any infectious disease, you know, mitigation is best done with a mix of methods working together to maximize the impact. You know, it's not a case of which is the most important measure. It's what combination of measures do you use? Which combination is the best to control it? And yeah, we are seeing in the animal health sector, there's new tools available, yeah, new vaccines, diagnostics, digital monitoring tools, yeah, to help with both control and surveillance. And yeah, I think we all recognize that biosecurity is probably the first line in the defense, but yeah, we also acknowledge with HPAI present in wild birds, yeah, that does give you a challenge. So I think yeah, it's collaboration and a mix of methods that's important.
Yes, of course. Thank you, David, for this comment. Maybe Estelle, you have also a comment
today. And first, I want to say I agree with the colleagues. I think it's a combination of tools. But now we're talking about collaboration, so I'm going to do a bit of publicity for WOHA. We had last October the regional conference of Europe for Europe, and there was a technical item on HPAI vaccination, and on the website you can find the recommendation, and it was worked on with all the members. So here you have an example of collaboration. And also for the next general session happening in May, there will be an animal health forum. It's 1.5 days, and it will be web streamed, so it's accessible to everybody. And there will be talks about surveillance, early detection, all those topics, and it would be great to have, and with a lot of speakers, and if everybody goes that way, it's a good way to have everybody on the same way. Thank you.
Thank you, Estelle, for this information. So maybe we can move to the next question before taking the question from the chat. We are talking about stamping out and culling. You know that is very important, but it has to be taken in consideration. Can we afford to spend so many lives? So maybe Jane, can you answer first this question? Culling, stamping out, really difficult to be solved in the general public now.
Yeah, thank you, Thierry. I mean, I think we have all agreed throughout the conference that we need a mixed approach, and there is no simple answer. So no, I cannot answer your question. But what I think I can do is to talk about a framework in which we can start to answer it together within a One Health perspective. What we need to do is to find the balance between all of the tools in the toolbox that we have, and how they can be tailored to the different local conditions, whether that's the structure of the poultry industry or the epidemiology in the area. And I've just started to lay out a few of those areas. So we need to protect animal health. And this is part of the approach of rapidly identifying, containing, and preventing the spread to other flocks. But we also need to protect animal welfare. And actually, highly pathogenic avian influenza may be an acute condition, but it does have very severe pathology. And so those birds are suffering while they're ill. So we need to think about how to protect them. We obviously need to protect human health. We have talked about the zoonotic potential of highly pathogenic avian influenza viruses, and one of the reasons that we deliver these control programs. But it's also about human welfare as well. There is a moral injury, distress to being involved in a mass culling event. And I think that the devastation to the farmers cannot be underestimated. So it's about human welfare too. And also the welfare of all of our consumers, you know, protecting the food supply chain, protecting trade. You know, we're in a cost of living crisis, and the availability and price of poultry products on the supermarket shelf matters to everyone. And we need trade to balance and keep the consumer preferences economic. So what one country may want to eat, another may not. And that's where international trade is so important. And I think probably the final thing, I've talked about One Health, that's One Health, One Welfare, but also One Environment. And we do need to protect the environment. There's an impact on the loss of production of the animals that we have invested in, but also the inputs to the culling and disposal, and the risk of environmental contamination. So there's lots of aspects that we can consider as a framework to try and find our optimum approach for our local conditions.
Yes, thank you, Jane. So maybe you were talking about trade. Let's talk about trade. What do you think about the vaccination of specific sectors? For example, layers, table eggs remain anyway on the market. Will this facilitate the trade? Maybe Estelle, did you reflect in WOHA about that topic?
Yeah, well, the question of sectoral vaccination has to be reflected first from the epidemiological interest. For animals that live longer, like lying hens, breeders, or turkey, or that are particularly exposed to open air, like poultry or ducks, they may represent a relevant target in some context, but this has to be considered as a specific vaccination strategy. In any case, activating vaccination triggers some requirement for surveillance to be able to detect infection in vaccinated flocks and potential drift of the virus. So the quality of the surveillance should be an important factor to, again, convince trade partners in relation to the vaccination strategy and overall quality of the veterinary services and their capacity to implement international standards. But as Lenny Coran said earlier, they selected in their scenarios which type of the poultry they were targeting because also of trade. So it's a complicated topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Estelle. Maybe our panelists have some more comments about the trade topic. Yes, Birte. Yes, please.
Yes, I of course are very concerned when it comes to the trade because it's so important for our members, and I pay very much attention to the fantastic presentation Tim Harder gave, and one of the things he said, which is a little bit sensitive, but it is that the surveillance around the world is not homogeneous, and I think we as Europeans, where we have really thorough surveillance, we need to go out and explain and maybe even demand that the surveillance in other parts of the world gets a bit better, because we will never fight this in Europe alone. We really have to do this on an international basis, and as it is for now, we might get a little punished in Europe by being so thorough, which is not really beneficial for not for the Europeans at least. So I would really encourage that we as Europeans go out and explain what we are doing and encourage others to get some really thorough surveillance systems established.
Yes, you're right. Thank you, Birte, for that comments. We have a few questions from the chat, and it's about an anonymous auditor. Do you think Turkey's vaccination won't be available before March 2024? Who can answer the question? I don't know, among the panelists or maybe among our speakers? We're talking about Turkey's vaccination. No answer? No.
I think it's a difficult question, and it's asking us to gaze into a crystal ball, and I'm not sure I'd like to make a prediction on that.
Okay, so we will see. We have another question. Biosecurity practice is not top priority for farmers while they are facing even bigger issues, for example, culling. Not only focus on farms, but also the stakeholders, feed companies, and catching crews must be trained. What do you think about that comment? Which is biosecurity practice is not top priority for farmers.
Well, if I can start, I can say that that's not my experience. I mean, I have visited mostly farms in the north of Europe, but also farms in south of Europe, and I really see that biosecurity is a really huge priority for farmers today. What I will also maybe put on the agenda here is that we also need to have some coherency between the different policies that comes out of the EU Commission, because right now we have an opinion on animal welfare from EFSA, where they encourage to have verandas of all broiler houses, and for me that is going to enhance the risk of having avian influenza introduced into the commercial poultry flocks. So a little bit of coherence could be nice. But to go back, I really have experienced that biosecurity is a huge of huge importance to the farmers.
Maybe Lenny, as a poultry practitioner, you are faced with that problems directly with farmers. Maybe you can give us some words about your experience.
Well, this is true that catching crews, because that was stated, can be of high risk. And we should not focus only biosecurity in farmers only, but there are so many people working from farm to farm, including catching gangs, but also, as this person say, feed delivery, that we need to include a thorough biosecurity at the regional level, not only just to a dedicated farm, but also to see the organization of the whole industry, including catching members. The concern that we'll need to keep in mind is that if we manage to vaccinate some flock, that would be no reason to drop on biosecurity, and that will be a constant effort to implement on any people working with poultry business to keep a very high level of biosecurity despite having vaccinated flocks.
And maybe, Lenny, did you discuss that with farmers? Because you have another question from the chat. I do think that the acceptance of the program, vaccination program strategy could be accepted by farmers.
But the vaccination plan acceptance, what depends on who pays, basically, and who can afford the vaccine. And as I showed in my presentation, more than the vaccine, the surveillance, the cost of the surveillance is the greatest cost. So that's a financial question that I cannot answer for the moment.
We have a question from Cornelia about uniform surveillance should be achieved in Europe to detect symptoms and to ensure animal holdings. Regular visits following uniform standards carried out by vets in holdings is very important, is one of the tools we need. EU acts are needed. So she's talking about maybe the delegated act regarding animal health visits, mandatory animal health visit, which is not implemented in each member state. So maybe somebody has a comment on that issue.
Yes. Maybe I can, because there, of course, I can only support Lenny when he says, what about the cost? And there I would need to say that this is not a poultry problem per se. This is a One Health problem. So we will really, I think we together should state that this is an issue for the authorities, for the society as a whole, to take care of this issue, to be able to put affordable, good protein on the table of the Europeans. So this is a political thing that we need to go out and lobby for, and we will, I assure you.
Thank you. Maybe a last question before giving the floor to Rens for a conclusion. Do you think that the adoption of a vaccination program could decrease the proper application of biosecurity measures? Maybe Lenny?
Well, yeah, that's basically an answer already. That's a question I already answered. We will all have to be careful that vaccination program should not decrease biosecurity, and that will be a constant line to follow.
Thank you. So thank you, all of you, for your comments, for your input. Thank you very much. And Rens, the floor is yours for the conclusion. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, panelists, and thank you, Thierry. A lot of information has been exchanged, very important, in only 1.5 hours. So with that, we'll try to wrap up. As said, a lot of information has been compiled, but during the webinar we tried to make some take-home messages, and of course, because made during the webinar can be extended for sure. But let's give it a try. Here we go. One, in the last years, the HPAI outbreaks have had an unprecedented biological impact on poultry and wild birds, with transcontinental movements involving Asia, Europe, Africa, and North and South America. I think that's a no-brainer. Two, the virus appears to have become endemic in some wild aquatic bird populations, causing major die-offs in some species. sporadic infections of wild mammals and rare human infections, fortunately. And 3, global reconsideration and re-evaluation of vaccination as a complementary tool when used with stamping out programs. So together, this is crucial. And unfortunately, it is said before by some of the speakers also, culling will always be part of our fighting this disease. How unfortunate it may be, of course. Dear colleagues, we had quite some insights, and perhaps you gained some prospects for things you can do to continue to mitigate the burden of HPAI. We are close to the end of our time together. Thank you very, very much for joining, listening, and contributing. And don't forget to hunt down those panelists and speakers. If you wanted more time to chat, please do. Thanks to our speakers, Tim Harder, Francesca Baldinelli, and Leni Goran. Our panelists, Berthe Steenberg, David John, Jane Clark, and Estelle Hamelin. Our moderator, of course, Thierry Chambon, and of course, our great FVE staff of colleagues in Brussels. Thank you all very, very much. Please check out the FVE social media channels and share your views, and have a great Easter weekend, of course. Bye-bye, take care.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Francesca.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
David, bye-bye.